You have a 1978 Highboy.
No, you don't.
Well, not me personally.
But my uncle and my dad ordered theirs with factory 460s.
No, they didn't.
No, they didn't. But you can imagine what it'd be like if they did, right?
You know, it's 2023, and I think it's time that we start to show these old trucks pronouns some respect. There's people out there calling their trucks Highboys, and they're not. There's even people transitioning from two-wheel drive to four-wheel drive. So let's take a little trip back in time to break down one of Ford's most infamous trucks, the Highboy. Now, it is important to note that Ford never actually called any of these trucks Highboys. It was kind of a post-production, consumer-driven nickname that stuck. It's really kind of an umbrella term that covers any F-250 four-wheel drive from 1967 to 1977 and a half. The reason it earned the nickname Highboy is because it sat about 2.5 inches taller than its F-100 4x4 counterpart, like this one. Contrary to popular belief, this was not a factory lift thrown on by Ford because they thought it would be cool and people would put big tires on them. That added ride height is actually because Ford decided to use a divorce transfer case. We're all probably familiar with our transfer cases being mounted directly to our transmissions, but actually back in the 60s when four-wheel drive was first being implemented on factory vehicles, Ford was using divorce transfer cases. Now, a divorce transfer case is where your transmission and your transfer case are actually separated. They're not bolted directly together, and instead they're coupled by a drive shaft which transmits power through the transmission into the transfer case. The added drivetrain length from the divorce transfer case made the front drive shaft enormous, a massive drive shaft. Bronco, tiny drive shaft. I mean, we're talking big old drive shafts. In order to make that big old shaft clear the truck, they had to increase the ride height. They did that in the front by adding more arch to the leaf springs, and in the rear, they got a 4-inch block. Those additional 2 inches of ride height gave birth to the nickname Highboy. But that is not the first time in history Highboy has been used. If you look at, say, a 32 Ford, people call them Highboys when they remove the fenders and the side skirts off, exposing the frame underneath. And that likely played into the adoption of the term for the F-Series. Because these trucks were made for 10.5 years, there's a lot of different engine combinations you could have. You could have a 240 inline 6, a 300 inline 6, a 351, a 352, a 360, or a 400, all depending on what year your truck is. In 1967, you had two options for a manual transmission. You could have the top loader 3-speed that was phased out in 1971, or you could have the MP435. That was a 4-speed transmission which lasted the entire lifespan of Highboy production. Now in 1973, when the dent side era began, you could also get them with a C6 3-speed automatic. As far as axles, they all came with either a Dana 44, a Dana 44 HD, or a Dana 60. All 8-lug, all low pinion, all drum brake, and all closed knuckle. That was until 1977, where they went to an open knuckle design with disc brakes. In the rear, they all came with full floater Dana 60s. Now these could be either had in the 16 or the 30 spline axle count, but they all came with 410 gears. Another way to identify a Highboy is based on the frame. Their frames are actually 4 inches narrower, which meant they couldn't run a gas tank behind the rear axle like we do now. They all had in-cab gas tanks. This wouldn't have been a big deal, but in 1977, safety regulations outlawed the production of any vehicles with in-cab gas tanks, which is probably what brought about the end of the Highboys. So there you have it, quick and dirty rundown on what constitutes a Highboy. If you looked at this video and it turns out you don't have a Highboy, then keep the word Highboy